Welcome to the Smart Connector, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs be the leader their ideal people love. Build your influence, wealth and success, attract others for all the right reasons, and become a smart connector, the architect of your amazing business and life. Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Balu, who is not only a prominent medical psychiatrist at Harley Street Healthcare here in London, but also an entrepreneur in his own right. Dr. Balu works with many highly successful entrepreneurs and executives across multiple sectors, and I'm so looking forward to getting his perspective on mental health and wellness in our sector. So, Dr. Balu, first of all, I'd like to say welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, for having me. I look forward to talking to you about this very important topic.
So, Dr. Balu, first of all, I'd like to hear a little bit about you. What's your history and how did you end up at Harley Street Healthcare?
I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I work in Kensington and Chelsea in primary care mental health. About 12 years ago, I was still working in the NHS, and NHS is the National Health Service. And I had the opportunity to work with a couple of entrepreneurs turning a big house into a mental health facility. And we did have quite high performing clients, come to stay with us in terms of getting treatment and so on and so forth. I was very interested in what was happening behind the scenes in terms of the numbers of how money was made, but also was invested. So I went to Oxford for my MBA, and I worked briefly in the world of finance. So I was an entrepreneur myself. But what I found very interesting there was many of my colleagues had emotional issues. They had difficulty in making decisions, and sometimes emotions got in the way of decisions. I would be in several boardrooms, and I was progressing with my career in finance when I was almost persuaded very strongly by a very senior banker to relook at my skill set and do something about combining my interest and experience in mental health psychology, psychiatry with finance and MBA. So then I went back into training, particularly looking at training into behavioral finance, neuroeconomics, looking at problem gambling, problem eating, what we call as process addictions, attention deficit issues, and now I work with I would say reasonably high performers, particularly people who have done well in their business or their professional life, but they still have got some issues in having full contentment with their lives, and sometimes have difficulty with relationship with self and others. If you look at my job title, I'm a consultant psychiatrist, still a practicing doctor in London. In the NHS, there's government and the private practice. But my work involves meeting all types of people, helping them live a contented, happy life. I know that it's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but that's what I do.
It's very, very important to live a happy life, but it's such an elusive goal for so many entrepreneurs, isn't it?
It is indeed, and sometimes entrepreneurship is quite interesting. Sometimes I see people who are coming out of MBA wanting to have the job title of an entrepreneur, but in my eyes, entrepreneurship is not a job title. It's something you live. You chase. There is this curiosity to learn. You're not living from paycheck to paycheck. You're not doing a 9 to 5. It's something deeper. It's not a job description. And people go into that and they're excited by the opportunities that they see, the team they built. But sometimes when they are hit with unexpected things, that's when they need the emotional insight and clarity so that they can keep achieving their goals and be on their journey, because there will be so many times when they question their path, and particularly during corona times, it's more relevant to our work within this group of people. And I'm delighted that there is an opportunity to talk to you and your audience about this.
Thank you. Well, indeed, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have faced some very, very severe challenges over the course of the last few months with this pandemic. And it has been great for some people. I know, particularly online business owners, some of them have reported that their figures are hugely up. And there is, of course, an opportunity, particularly if you're involved in healthcare or anything that is kind of bordering on that. But at the same time, a lot of brick and mortar businesses and service businesses have suffered huge and very dramatic declines. And it would be great to know if you have any tips, Dr. Balu, for business owners that have suffered from this sudden impact that has left them really with hardly any business or revenues at all.
Yeah, no, this is quite interesting. You say that, Jane. I work within the health sector, and I have an interesting portfolio where we also consult some technology companies which are reporting the type of success that you talk about. And I also, look into food. In fact, that is another passion of mine. And food is growing on the increase. Organic food, growing things. Very very interesting things are happening. But I ask myself a question, and I ask the same entrepreneurs who are doing well the same question. People who are making their money in the entertainment business, in the brick and mortar business, are the ones who are customers to these technology companies and food companies. So this success may not last for a long time if they don't take into account the importance of the other businesses, for it to be sustained, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
But having said that, what I recognize is, for example, if you are in a brick and mortar business, you're renting out and looking for a passive income. All of that schemes and that kind of mindset is gone now. Yeah. And what is very important is, if you ask yourself, what kind of value are you creating in terms of what you do, then you're still going to be relevant even in Corona times. So you need to be flexible with your thinking. If you're one of those people who inherited a lot of wealth and also have all of that in big buildings, and your tenants are all leaving, well, it's going to be a bit difficult. You need to take a bit of a hit. Yeah. But if you're creative, if you're willing to work with your tenants, keep them going, look after them, because your tenants could be technology companies, food companies, you know and fashion is struggling, transport is struggling. There are some companies which are really struggling. But what I always say is, be flexible, be willing to rethink, bring out your entrepreneurial spirit, look for opportunities, because the goals have really, are different. The goals of the business have changed. And it is very important not to be consumed by the emotions, that come with this disruption. So I know it is easy to say, but it's difficult to practice. It's very important to keep that at the fore of whatever you do every day. Be mindful that there will be opportunities in every sphere. And even pre-corona, these industries were support industries, supporting many other businesses, like the core businesses. So I can't see that they will not be relevant, but there will be pain in the short term. And hence, being able to think differently is what is important. And we talk about sort of emotional resilience, the need for that, so that you can overcome obstacles and follow through with the vision. That's very very important.
Thank you. So let's just look at the topic of mental agility and flexibility, because that's something that you mentioned. And I've certainly been very, very impressed by some of the entrepreneurs that I know at how quickly they have managed to, I mean, they call it pivot, don't they? But
Yeah.
how they have generally taken on the challenges created by COVID-19 and actually changed their business model and got something new up and running really fast. But those are some of the people that I know, but I also know that there will be other people who've struggled to do that. And do you have any particular tips on how to maintain a flexible and agile mind under stress?
Yeah, what is very important is to recognize your own, strengths and weaknesses, as most people say. So, giving you an example, I have a number of entrepreneurs, particularly the ones who've been very successful in the Silicon Valley, who, in my view, have what we call as a bit of an autistic trait. They're single-minded, they're perfectionists, and they have had great success in a particular way in terms of working in technology or one particular area. They may not have had a lot of emotional intelligence or the ability to deal with big teams, and they're not very comfortable with the grays, in the business as we call it. They are very black and white people. So it is very important to be aware. This is, I'm giving you an example. Sometimes people come and tell me that they have always been successful and they can't understand why they're not successful now, because they should be. So that is something that one needs to be prepared to look into. And I tell them that the strengths, the attributes that you had pre-corona sometimes have got in the way of you dealing with the uncertainties the corona brings. And in order to deal with the uncertainty, first of all, we need to be comfortable enough to embrace it rather than pushing it away. Many people feel very distressed by the uncertainty that this has brought about. But I tell them, look, uncertainty is here to stay. Corona is here to stay, and we need to be aware of the way we deal with it. This is the number one. Number two, when you look at emotional agility, it is the individual's ability to experience, their thoughts, emotions, and events in a way that it doesn't, drive them into negative pattern of thinking or anxiety or anger. But it's very important to bring out, qualities like compassion, curiosity, courage, gratitude. And these things can be practiced, believe it or not. And we talk a lot about being mindful. So these are some of the techniques that one can use. We talk about emotional hygiene and having a routine. Always pay attention to the software in you. That's what I tell people. We have an amazing body hardware, we all understand that, but not many people pay equal attention to the mind as much as they do to the body. So it's very important to look after your mind. And if you're really stuck, talk to somebody. And if you're even stuck after that, talk to a professional. They're not going to judge you. There are easier ways to doing it. And the simple tip I always tell people is, look, if you're having a mind and if you're using it, just ask yourself who is maintaining it. Like how you would maintain anything that you possess, you need to maintain your mind. And corona times are not going to be any different.
Mm. That's very, very insightful, Dr. Balu. So the people that you were talking about, your Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, I do recognize the type because, of course, that particular profile is often drawn to high tech industries, and they tend to be very willing and able to focus on a specific goal and follow logical steps in order to get to that goal. But in terms of the emotional connection with other people, how would you say that that impacts on success? And can it be something that is a developable skill as well?
Indeed, this is my, if you really focus on what I do on a day-to-day basis, this is particularly my area of interest, and this is how I combine my interest and knowledge of neuroscience and business. As I mentioned, there are certain things that we talk about in terms of what we call as emotional intelligence. You may have heard about this term. When you look at hard intelligence, people have numerical skills and mathematical skills. They can solve problems very easily. But sometimes we know, and we know this is very important, particularly in a very connected world. Well, when we are looking at working with humans more than just the machines, we know that self-regulation, in a particularly self-emotional skills. So looking at your self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-management is very key. You can't be very explosive. You can't, what to say, be very angry and alienate people. So you need to be able to bring people together, even though your emotions might be slightly all over the place. For some people, yeah. So that is very important to look at self-emotional skills. And we also emphasize a lot on looking at intrapersonal development. So looking at developing human potential and performance rather than just looking at very hard skills like numerical skills, for example. And other area that we want to focus on is relationship management capabilities. How they interact with themselves and others, and also looking at the wider impact. The social economic awareness around what is happening, in the wider circle. So these are some of the things that are not easily, what to say, identified in people who have that particular, what we call as an autistic trait. So the very good
Yes.
technical way, but when it comes to emotions, they may not be. And what helps is, they get frustrated that they've always been a bright student, bright employee, bright entrepreneur, and everyone has marveled their excellence. And why can't they do this? That's what gets to them, that frustrates them. But I always tell them that there is a way, there is a method to learn this, and if you don't learn it in a particular method, you will not be able to use it when you need it the most. So, it can be taught, it can be learned. The first step is awareness. And sometimes people think, talking to a shrink or, going to a counselor is a sign of weakness. I would say the opposite. If you want to be stronger, speak to someone.
And we all have our strengths and weaknesses, don't we? And of course, when it comes to emotional expression and understanding ourselves and understanding other people, we're all going to have, regardless of whether we sit on that spectrum or not, we're all going to have strengths and weaknesses. So I'm sure that your clients really appreciate your input, Dr. Balu. But I have another question, which is, do you think adult autism, or should we say the high functioning autism, do you think it is often diagnosed, or do you think people just come to you perhaps if they have a problem but they don't understand what the problem is, and then you do the diagnosis for them? I'm just interested to know how widespread the actual diagnostic process is in here in the UK, for example.
Yeah, no, I make a general point. Most of my clients come from all over the world, and
Mm.
I start. So I can give you a bit of a context. When parents come to me, they want their children to do really well, and they are curious to understand what sort of things should they do. Should their children eat something? Should they do this exercise or go to this coaching center or whatever? They come with these questions. And what is very important to understand is, no two people are the same. So, there is no one size fits all. There's no one magic formula. So I always say, success, to be successful, you need to be mad. Yeah, that's very important. Success is not normal. If you look at it technically, yeah, you need to be extraordinary. You need to be crazy to be successful. To talk about people like Elon Musk and other people, right? So, this is true, right? If you want to be extraordinary, you need to be mad. So, when I mean mad, it is not, coming to a doctor, because doctors are very good in diagnosing disease. I'm not talking about success as a disease. You need to be very, very clear. Yeah, what I'm talking about is success is not normal. So disease is in one end of the spectrum, and the extreme success is in another end of the spectrum. And most people are somewhere in the middle, kind of normal. Yeah, that is number one. Number two, most people, the high performers, don't get diagnosed. And in fact, I would even argue, I'm talking about this publicly, I might get some criticism for this, but I will say, this openly. I would even argue that successful people are positively discriminated by mental health services. I know I'm making a bold statement here. I'll tell you why they are positively discriminated. They would always, be said, look, are you having a job? You're working well. No, no, don't bother with it. We don't want to medicalize it. I do get it, but they do suffer from emotional challenges. It has to be looked at. So that's number two.
Mm.
To medical students, I often get this question. They say, doc, why are you working with high achievers? Shouldn't you be working with low achievers? My answer to that is, for the high achievers, the world and the people around them consider them as high achievers, but they themselves don't consider themselves as high achievers, because if they did, they wouldn't be high achievers. They always think that they're low achievers, and they push themselves. So in that process, they're frustrated, they're angry. It's like, only a rocket or a Concorde jet needs a high level of maintenance. Whereas a push bike may not need that level of maintenance, if you get my analogy. So, it is interesting, when you look at it that way. And then when you come to the health service itself, sometimes some of these people are very frustrated by the delays that happen with the health service. I work in the NHS, so bless the NHS. We're very good in dealing with people who are very unwell. We fast track them. But for people who are wanting to improve themselves, we are not the right people, sadly. So most people don't get diagnosed. And I would say there is a disproportionate number of people within this high performing, high achieving community, suffering from emotional issues. I wouldn't necessarily label them as mentally unwell. I'm not talking about mental illness here, but it's about emotional challenges which impact their work, their family, and their happiness. And that's a very important area to address. After all, success also includes your mental well-being. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I definitely do agree. And so much of what you said resonated with me because I think just the pursuit of success in itself, it sets you apart from most people because most people are average. And that means that they are accepting of an average life.
Yeah.
So high achievers or people that are striving constantly for success, they are different. And when you're different as a human, you are then set apart. And that's painful in itself. It's painful and uncomfortable because we're kind of herd animals, aren't we?
Yeah.
So I just I love what you say because I totally resonate with it, and I guess in a way I remember when my children were small. My younger daughter is she's quite bright, so I was looking at the problems of gifted children, and it reminded me of the schools that don't think if a child is gifted, they very rarely think that that's a problem. So therefore, the child that is gifted, which is then grows up into the high achieving adult, quite often is often ignored, and just everybody assumes because they're getting the grades or they're just being able to do the work and it's not difficult for them, that life is easy for them, and that is so not the case. So I find what you say is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and also what we find is, sometimes these high achievers use a lot of their emotional bandwidth to succeed in the chosen path, which means they haven't got the bandwidth to, say, for instance, look at loving relationships, for example. I know of a lot of people and who do incredibly well in their businesses, but they may not be able to connect with their partners, or they may not be able to go on a date. I have people asking me very simple questions about this, when they can solve some complex mathematical issue, or come up with some wonderful theory about certain concepts. And because these kind of things needs a lot of emotions, and you need to be very perceptive to some of the subtle non-verbal cues that go with this. And it is a great source of frustration for them, particularly when you're successful, when you're recognized, when you have money, when you have status. But if you don't feel that your soul is satisfied, if you don't feel that your soul is connected with something which is beautiful, then you kind of almost then go into a state of depression. And this is why sometimes when people ask me, why do these high functioning people commit suicide, for example? We hear about this a lot. And again, we can go on and on about it. I know that's a long topic, but it's very important that one looks after their mental hygiene, irrespective of their level of success, their status, money, or position in society. Because as I said, if you have a mind, if you're using it, ask who is maintaining.
I've got another question for you, Dr. Balu, which is really about exposure because successful people are often very exposed. There's a lot of people that are looking at them, and whether they are the leader of a business or perhaps whether they're very, very visible on social media or in the public eye, that carries a whole set of challenges emotionally as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's very important. There is a concept. I think it was Brené Brown who talked about this emotional exposure. It is hard because you are deciding to be with someone. There could be a business partner. You have an image on the social media, or you get into an intimate relationship, and you begin to fear that this person will get to know you better than you know yourself. And you're sometimes confused, because you don't know what identity you should assume. Sometimes people go by their job titles, when they come to work, and when they go home, they have a particular role. But when you are exposed extensively, you have different people with different lenses looking at you, and then you're getting almost enormed by this responsibility to live up to these people's expectation, although they may not expect you to be that. And so sometimes these emotions can be, it's a very intense, and it can be very difficult to identify as well. But it's very important to recognize, and to be able to manage that. So you will know very well that people in the public eye will have public relations managers and teams to manage all of these things. But it is also important to include their own mental well-being in the mix.
Yes, and unfortunately, when that doesn't happen, we've all seen, as you said, high-profile people who have very, very sadly taken their own lives. And I often think that's because they didn't have the right advisor or supporter in the background to actually help them process and make sense
Absolutely.
of being that person that's really not the real them, because we all have to manage our profile if we're in business. I mean, I have to do it. And, people think that they know me, and I'm sure I'm speaking for lots of other people who also have, let's just say, quite visible publicly. And it is challenging because on the one hand, it is the real you, but on the other hand, it's a curated version of you, which means that there's a whole side of you that is invisible. And it's very, very important to be able to differentiate, I think, personally, between those two versions of you, and to know that if some people think that that's the whole you, then that's them and that's their opinion. But it doesn't mean that you that is the real you is any less valid.
Exactly. It's very, very important. And many times, what I find is when you start having a conversation with some of these individuals, when they're open enough to talk about them, we then can identify some subclinical emotional issues, which don't fulfill, what we call as a diagnostic criteria. And as I mentioned, this is not about illness; it's about wellness. You know, so sometimes an open conversation can identify some of these things, and many times what I find is they are brushed aside because most people who find it wouldn't know what to do. It's a bit like how when you go on this fire safety training, they talk about the hazards and what sort of things you need to be aware of. We all know when there's a big fire, we can call the fire service, and the firemen can come and put it out. But we are not always aware of the things that are around us which could be combustible. But that is where I'm coming to. And especially with mental health, and if you're an entrepreneur, a mental health crisis could be extremely damaging, as you can imagine. Extremely, extremely damaging. And I always tell people that when you look at the human race, we all have created this wonderful earth with what is available on Mother Earth with just our mind power. The mind has directed our bodies. The mind has created teams. So how vital it is to maintain it. And absolutely, right. What you said about being able to differentiate between these two selves. And sometimes what we also find is some people, due to their conditioning, you can talk about upbringing, where they have been, social situations, etc., create very stubborn mental blocks as even defense mechanisms. And sometimes you can talk about this in again another session. This is a hugely elaborate session as well. Very, very aware that you're creating a block, you're creating a stubborn block. Yeah. And it is not your own self, and you need to be then open to advice and slowly shift that. That's very important too. See, these are some of the sort of things that we find out during a discovery call or a session, and then we can then explore things in detail. I know we don't want to get into what actually happens in a session, but yeah, these are the things that we do bring out, and people leave very, very insightful. And I always say that a lot about your business, your customers, your marketplace, and so on and so forth. But don't you think it is important to know a lot about you, your mind, how you operate as well?
Well, I certainly feel that that is very, very important because the problem is if you are the leader of a business and you don't understand yourself, then you are going to be inconsistent in terms of your leadership. And so, of course, it's good for you, but it's also good for the business, isn't it?
It is indeed, indeed, and of course, and as I said, this is such a valuable asset. Your mind, the entrepreneur's mind, and the co-founders' minds, and the minds of the employees are the assets to the business, right? And the mind is the director, and so it's very important to not let it suffer in many ways, I suppose. And I think what is very important for me to get across as a message is very commonly people think, if you have an issue with your mind, it's a sign of weakness. And we kind of want to hide our weakness and we want to be in denial for a long time till it spills over, till others see this as a problem. And all I ask for is more insight and awareness into that. And actually, identifying emotional challenges earlier on is a required strength. And I will as first go to say that investors, in fact, we had an investor, working with me on this, and particularly he wanted all his portfolio company CEOs to go for an assessment with me. It's quite interesting and insightful. So, I would say, investing in yourself is very important, and having this quality of checking your mental well-being would be an important qualification for somebody to be an entrepreneur.
Definitely, because as you said, just to go back to the beginning of our conversation, the mental resilience and the toughness is very, very critical because we can't really be somebody that goes to bed for a few days because somebody's upset us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
just can't do
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I'd like to ask you, Dr. Balu, about narcissism because this is something that I'm very interested in. And particularly right at the moment in the news, there's a lot of talk about Jeffrey Epstein. And then before that, there was a talk about Harvey Weinstein. And then you hear about all these people who are incredibly successful. And yet there's obviously something wrong with them because they fall to this incredibly exploitative behavior. And what I've heard is that narcissists are overrepresented in the population of successful high flyers. Just be interested to know what your take on that is and whether it's a treatable condition.
Well, this is quite interesting and very important topic, and I must say, within the clinical world, this is sometimes recognized in meetings as a passing comment. We don't take ownership of it and treat it. That I can tell you very openly, for various reasons. The reasons are extremely complex, but we'll not go into that. But it is not recognized within the clinical area, and there is no recognized treatment that is being given out in the established clinical setting. But having said that, this causes havoc. Yeah, it's a bit like keeping the corona and just ignoring it. A big hospital might think, well, yeah, corona is a virus, right? But actually, we are treating the complications of the coronavirus rather than the virus itself at the moment as we speak, because we don't have a vaccine, we don't have an antiviral that can treat with it. So it is a bit like that. Narcissism is everywhere within successful communities. So if you look at narcissistic personality, what does it involve? Being self-centered, being arrogant, a lack of empathy and consideration for other people, an excessive need for admiration, for example. These are some of the common things that we see in narcissists. And if you look at the current business environment, when you have this, you attract people to you, and with people, you can attract wealth. With wealth comes success. So if you're defining somebody by their ability to attract wealth and people around them, then you would create a lot of narcissists. But if out to create value for people, then you're talking about something else. And narcissists not always create value. Yeah, so it may not be sustained. If you're thinking about developing a narcissistic trait to be successful in business, people have asked me this. People say, oh, I'm not self-centered, I'm not arrogant, I look after others, and hence I'm not successful in business, I'm not suited for this job. I have a lot of young people telling me this. I feel very sorry for them because they look around and they think you need to be a narcissist to be successful. It can be true in certain business environments, but it is never sustainable. That's number one. This is from a business point of view. Number two, what is even more important is narcissists are never happy. They're not contented. This is a proper sickness, right? So they have huge issues in interpersonal relationships. And if you go back into their childhood, they would have had a lot of issues with their upbringing, and they do need a proper therapy for them to sort of come to terms with some of those challenges and also exhibit and express themselves in a different way that's more acceptable and for them to be more contented. So, see, the difference is the way I see it is a bit like, how there was a craze for, fatness and gas guzzlers, right? At one point, if you're really fat, you're rich, mighty, powerful, right? And you need to have a really big car and just drive it down with a lot of smoke coming out of it. But now that's not the indicator for success. You could be in your shorts and t-shirt. You could be driving a Tesla or walking or biking to work, and you could be considered as successful. I think the shift hasn't come yet in a big way within the entrepreneur world. From narcissists being recognized, for their success, but it is changing slowly. It is a real condition. The sad reality is that the health services are not designed around the world to deal with them, but it has to be dealt with. And if not, we're going to have more problems.
That's an absolutely fascinating response. Thank you, Dr. Balu. And I would imagine that most narcissists don't self diagnose. I wouldn't imagine that they come to you saying, I think I might have a narcissistic personality that is causing problems in my life. That is a guess. Am I right?
100% right. And the challenge also is, say, a spouse or a partner suspects somebody to be a narcissist. How do they tell them that? And also, clinically, many people with narcissism have a bubble that they live in. And sometimes one needs to be very careful not to burst the narcissistic bubble because they can commit suicide if that happens. And this is something that we have seen with some of these people that you mentioned. They can go into extreme depression or take their own lives because their bubble has been bursted, their image has been trashed. But what is very important is you can really think about this in a slightly different way. It is very important that people in the entrepreneurial world have leadership and a bit of authority. They may have a sense of superiority and arrogance, so self-absorption and self-admiration, exploitativeness and entitlement. These are some of the qualities that we see in them. But what is very important is to be able to feed this back gently to them. I know many organizations have this 360-degree feedback. They have the personality, tests and all sorts of things. But when you're a lone entrepreneur, when you're kind of the boss, as it were, many of these things don't happen. And in fact, what I'm trying to do is work with a couple of colleagues to find the right language and the vehicle to gently get this message to them, communicating to them that their personality trait may have gained them some success, but it's not going to be sustained, and it is going to be very expensive for their own well-being, mental well-being. And we've had some success, rather than if you think about a balloon, and you rather than taking a pin to the balloon and bursting it, you can slowly let air out and make it more manageable. That's the approach that we need to take, in my view. But it's a long process, and it can't happen overnight. People have to be patient, but it can be done.
Yes, yes. Absolutely brilliant work and totally fascinating. So, Dr. Balu, I wanted to ask about business partnerships because a lot of entrepreneurs create partnerships with other people. Sometimes it might be between two individuals, or it might be between companies, or of course, there's a lot of acquisitions that go on in the entrepreneurial and finance world, and that means people coming together. What sort of problems do you see with those partnerships, and do you ever advise business partners or acquirers or people who are involved in mergers and acquisitions?
You're absolutely. I think this is a very very important topic, and I'm glad that you've asked this. If we put all of the things that we have talked about, till now, one thing that sits in terms of as a common thread among the issues with relationships. So if you find any of these issues manifesting in the business world, they will almost always take the form of a problem in relationship. So it would be a relationship with self, or it could be a relationship with the other. And as you know very well, teams, partnerships are very important in any business. Of course, there are lots of rules, legal documents governing partnerships, but partnership is one of an emotional one, in my view. Because you need to have a lot of emotions to really enjoy a good partnership. You can't just pull out the partnership agreement every time when you're discussing something. It doesn't work. I have advised so many companies which are relatively doing well. Their accountant might say that their numbers are going good, but there is no sense of partnership within them. In fact, even if you look at our business, we have general practices, a lot of general practitioners are partnerships. There are partnerships where the GPs, the doctors, don't see each other at all for months, in fact for years. It's a bit like loveless marriages. You just sake of existing under one roof, but you don't have anything in common. But I would say, if such things happen, you're just going down the wrong route for the growth of your business. The way I describe it to people is, when you're a couple, not you're not just a couple just to come together biologically to give rise to an offspring. Your relationship, your compassion and care for each other should nurture the child when they grow up. It's not about just feeding the child with some food and drink, but it's also about the emotional, the feed that you give the child. In the same way, excellent partnerships are extremely important for the emotional health of the company, and for the company to sustain and grow. You need that. That is at the heart of it. So what I tell people is, if you have real differences, because people can change their minds and people can be nasty, that's people for you, right? If you have real differences, sit down and sort it out. Sometimes I've heard people say, look, we want to be in a partnership, but somehow we're not seeming to agree on things. That is the time when you need to bring someone external to comment on the relationship patterns. Sometimes you may be wanting to communicate something, but you end up saying something else. you know so patterns of communication will have to be looked at, and this all can be meant. So as you know very well, partnership is important not only from a financial viewpoint, but also to create value for business. And it has to be based on emotions to a certain extent, and not let emotions get in the way of decisions.
Well, all I can say is that I've been through it myself. I love partnerships, so I've made lots and lots of partnerships with people over the years, and some of them have gone well, and some of them haven't. And I've worked for a business. I ran a business that was acquired by a US company, and when we had the acquisition, it was all a complete disaster. And so, I mean, I've seen the ups and the downs of that, and I absolutely resonate with what you say.
Absolutely,
It's
because
so
if you look at from a technical point of view, people talk about sort of economies of scale and where you can make cuts and things like that. That's a very straightforward acquisition or mergers. But if you really want to grow, it's like, we can be a couple on paper, but we may not really have the ability to bring out a lovely child. Now we can give birth to a child, but that's not what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? So if you're
yeah.
really going to measure the success of your partnership on how you bring up lovely children, yeah, the same way lovely products, products that people love and want to come back to. If you want to make an emotional connection to your customers through your products and service, you need to have an amazing emotional relationships within the companies, partnerships as well. So that is what is important. You need to invest in what is important to you. So that's, yeah, no, amazing. You're absolutely right, and this is a very common topic, though.
Yes, it's fascinating, and I think it's Richard Branson that said, "If you look after your employees, they'll look after the customers."
Absolutely.
So a lot of people say customers first, but he says no, employees first, because they're on the front line with your customers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when the entrepreneur makes good partnership with his or her co-founders, the board, and the employees, and that relationship, that partnership extends beyond the company to include the customers, and that will be seen in the products that they develop and the services they provide. This is a guarantee, by the way. When you invest in this, these are foolproof
Yeah.
things, and which I've tried and tested over the last 15 years. This works. Yeah, this is not some
Mm.
hypothesis, but the big difference is we all individual people, we are not aware of how our emotions affect other people, and hence we get it wrong.
Mhm. So, at what point would somebody come and call you in? Is it usually when they have a problem, or would they do it because they're in the middle, perhaps, of or contemplating a merger or an acquisition? Or at what point would they bring you in, Dr. Balu?
Yeah, yeah. Ideally, we would like it to happen much before, when a problem hits. But as a doctor, I have seen most people only come when they're desperate, right? And the business model for a health clinic is that you don't make them deliberately desperate. Actually, you make a service which caters people who are desperate, which also increases the healthcare costs, in terms of how much they would spend, but also their own personal costs. Yeah. So
Yeah.
commonly in practice, people come when they are hitting a problem. In fact, they will try and resolve it by so many other means which are expensive and which could be even more damaging before going down this path. Because I have this unique advantage in that I can share a few case details without divulging a lot of information. See, I can sometimes go in and as a finance manager. In fact, in one of the assignments, I was the house butler, for example, right? So,
Mm.
because I have the skills and I need to have access to certain areas. Some people may not want a doctor as a psychiatrist involved, because they think that's a bit of a whatever stigma. And some people, don't frankly think there is anything wrong. But when I would say, if you are doing anything that involves human beings, right, and if these human beings are using their minds, yeah, have someone, I'm not saying that a psychiatrist, but have someone who could actually have a look at if the mind meetings and mind partnerships are all happening in the right way. It's a bit like, when you put your house together and you are making some electric connections. Make sure, you may know how to maybe wire your house, but make sure that there is a certified electrician looking over it and saying, yeah, 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 you've done a good job. Otherwise you will have sparks, and you don't want to have the house burning down and then call the fireman to put the fire out. You better do these things properly in the first place, so that, in my words to my investors who want to invest in me, so that I can be made redundant. As a doctor, I need to be made redundant. That's the ultimate goal of any health system. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, and I can't see that happening with all the new diseases coming through. But that is what is very important. Prevention is always better than cure. We would like people to call us much earlier in the journey, but they don't.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Balu, I'd also like to just touch briefly on the topic of addiction, because addiction, I know, was absolutely rife when I worked in media. When I ran businesses in media, it was a terrible, terrible problem. And I know that it's also a big problem in the city. And even though people might say it's not as visible now, because obviously I think things are perhaps have tightened up a bit since the time that I worked there. I think it's still a very, very big issue. Do you see people with addiction issues a lot? And how effective and easy is it to treat them?
Again, going back to my point about success. Now, how would you be successful if you're not addicted to success or work? I know, that's a joke, but still, you have an addictive tendency. Yeah. And I always say people that successful people do have that, but we're not talking about that. We are talking about the most damaging aspects of addiction, in particularly substance addiction. There could be many other things, sex addiction, gambling, all sorts of addictions are rife in the city, right? And it's not just in the city, it's in many areas, but particularly people who are in the high pressure environment, they use mind altering substances. So
Mm.
what we mean by the term addiction is it's a compulsive physiological need for the use of habit forming substances, such as, say, for instance, nicotine, heroin, alcohol, and it has to be characterized by tolerance, and there could be some physiological symptoms upon withdrawal, so that then makes the person seek the substance and leave everything else, and that is when it becomes a huge problem. So it is a huge issue, and many of these people, either start with as a recreational activity, because they are among peers and they're having a evening do or whatever, or people have some undiagnosed condition which then they use this to self medicate, and very soon, when they don't deal with the underlying issue, the substance takes hold of them and they don't go down the slippery slope. Yeah, it's a very, very common condition. So I talk about 4 A, within this environment. You need to look into attention issues. There's a lot of issues with attention. People have attention issues big time. Yeah. And then you look at anxiety, because there is always a perceived threat, threat to the job, threat to the promotions, all sorts of stress, uncertainty. So the stress comes with anxiety. So attention issues, anxiety, automatically you have some addictions in the background, because people try substances to hide these two things to start with, and then they go down the slippery slope, then which leads into huge issues later on. And interestingly, when people hit their kind of early 60s, it's important to look for Alzheimer's, memory issues. This is not something which many doctors talk about in the context of city, but we do have people, who, because of their lifestyle, excessive use of, we do have a lot of people using things like Xanax, benzodiazepines like Klonopin. I see many of my clients from the US, who very easily get access to these things, and they present with minor memory problems even in their early 60s, which goes undiagnosed for a long time because they are high powered. They have several mechanisms to hide this, but it's a serious issue.
Hmm. Yes, I'm sure it is.
There's a lot to take on, but addiction in the city, it's a completely big new topic in itself. There are so many ways to manage it, but if we can destigmatize this and let people seek help much earlier in the journey, they will be much more productive.
Hmm. So the overall message, Dr. Balu, is that there is no stigma attached to mental health issues, and that even the most successful people in our society, and frequently entrepreneurs who are right at the top of the success tree, if you like, often experience mental health difficulties. And the message that you're saying is get help if you can, seek help early. Just support is very, very important. If you're living a big life, a high pressure life, then you need support, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, as I said several times during our conversation, stigma and fear only comes when people see the complications of an untreated mental health problem. So I do understand, and to a certain extent, accept. I know as a psychiatrist, I should be, raising my hands and legs against this stigma, but I do understand why people are stigmatized, because of the fear that goes with the complications. But what we're talking about is mind maintenance. So like anything in life, when you have a car and you maintain it well, you always enjoy your journey. The car doesn't break down when you're going on your important journey. Same with your phones, same with your fridges, same with everything that you have in your life. But why don't you do the same to your mind? So I say to people, if you're using your mind, if you have a mind, if you're using it, just maintain it. Sometimes you need a bit of management, but if you don't do this well, well, you're taking a chance with your mind because it could crash at the most crucial time, and you have no one to blame apart from you.
Okay, well, that's a great message to finish with, Dr. Balu, and I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I'm sure that our listeners will have got so much from it. So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you,
No,
I
thank
hope.
you. Thank you very much for taking out some of your time and inviting me. And it's a delight to be able to talk to people like you, who I'm fascinated. You're very insightful, and we need a lot of people like you. And we need to get this message out there so that people like me can be redundant. That's my wish and dream going forward.
Yes, that's maybe wishful thinking right now,
I know, I
but,
know, I know. But
yes,
you know
it's a
the
good
message,
to have
right?
the long
Because
term goal.
I'm selfish when I say that, because if all those entrepreneurs are looking after their minds and creating more value, definitely we will find more solutions in a much faster way. We can't afford to have entrepreneurs not performing to their fullest extent, and in fact, we should never have any entrepreneur commit suicide. And for that matter, no one should commit suicide. But you know what I mean.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Balu. Thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your week.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. And you have a great week too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Smart Connector podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not head over to janebayler.com and order a copy of my free report on building your personal brand. I'd love to connect with you on social media. And finally, don't forget to like and subscribe to my podcast so that you never miss a show. Thanks for listening in, and see you soon.